This is going to be the third installment of my video series here on Oakridge Cemetery here in Marshall, Michigan. You know, and you could probably film 100 videos on here and tell a bunch of stories every time and still not run out of the amount of stories in this amazing cemetery. But I'm going to give it a go here and give you some more stories. If you want to take a minute to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel as well. That way you can follow along with me on this journey. And let's get going on some amazing stories here at Oakridge Cemetery. This is my third video on Oakridge Cemetery. The cemetery was originally developed in 1839 and consists of 65 acres in size, and is composed of 4 large sections. As I mentioned in earlier videos, it has approximately 15,800 burials and is one of the oldest and historic operating cemeteries in Michigan. It's a rich place in history and one that holds many fascinating stories. Today we're going to explore a mix of tales of amazing people that impacted not only the community of Marshall, but other parts of the county. Let's begin our journey at the grave of a man named Charles Pratt Brown, who was the youngest and the last child in a family of 9 children, who was born in Richmond, Vermont in 1847. All of his brothers and sisters possessed a robust and rugged constitution, but Charles did not. He had been in delicate health from infancy, following an attack of scarlet fever at the age of 3 years old. As he grew older, he manifested constant pulmonary problems most of his adult life. He was the son of Stephen W. Brown and Laura Pratt. Charles would move to Marshall, Michigan when he was 21 years old in 1868, where he began working with the First National Bank. He did not spend more than a year or 2 with the bank before he took the knowledge he gained from his work and began to invest in real estate. He would become uniformly successful, building up an extensive real estate operation. He eventually would marry Miss Ella Monroe in 1872, with whom he would be a constant attendee at the Presbyterian Church. He was considered by those who knew him to be a man of extreme independent views and great decision of character, and for that he was well respected in the community. Over the years, he became well known in the community for his deep interest in charitable undertakings, and it had long been his cherished aim to leave the beautiful large home that he had built as a gift to the city to be used as a hospital. His wife Ella preceded him in death in 1906. At the time of his death in 1910, he was one of the city of Marshall's oldest and best-known residents, passing away at his home on High Street. As mentioned earlier, his health throughout his life had always left him frailer than other members of his family, and the last 2 years were the most difficult for him. Prior to his death, he had suffered an illness that lasted 5 weeks. He was 63 years old. Today, his tombstone in Oakridge Cemetery bears a very unique Roman numeral inscription for both himself and Ella, under an ornately carved Roman-style column monument. The next story we're going to explore is the life of a well-loved veterinarian in the city of Marshall, whose name was Louis Arthur Ruff, and his wife, Carrie Ruff. Could there be any better name for someone in such a profession? Louis Ruff was born in April of 1885 in Homer, Michigan. He was the son of Joseph and Catherine Ruff. Joseph Ruff was born in Würzburg, Germany, and had come to the U.S. when he was 13 years old, settling in Buffalo, New York. He later moved to Albion and also Concord, Michigan. He had served in the Civil War as a lieutenant in Companies D and B of the 12th Michigan Infantry. He was credited with being the force behind building a monument to his fallen comrades at the Battle of Shiloh following the war in Tennessee. As a young man, Louis attended Porter Rural School and later Albion Public Schools, and would go on to study veterinarian medicine at Grand Rapids Veterinarian College, graduating in 1911 at the age of 26. Lewis had moved to Marshall and took over the veterinarian practice of Dr. Dean and would practice in the city for 39 years until 1950, when he would sell the practice to Dr. James Campbell. A year after he graduated, he married Carrie Noonan in August of 1912 in Albion. Carrie was born in 1876 in Lee Township, Michigan, and was the daughter of Frank Weaver and Sarah Van Arman, and she lived her entire life in this area. Her marriage to Lewis was her second, and she had one son named Laverne Curtis Noonan from her prior marriage. She and Lewis would be active members of the First Baptist Church for many years. In his time with his practice in Marshall, he was past president of the Calhoun County Veterinarian Society and also a member of the Sons of Union Veterans. Carrie Ruff passed away in June of 1954, a few hours after she had fallen at home and fractured her hip. She died at Oaklawn Hospital following the trauma that evening at around 9:30 p.m. Lewis would go on to remarry Virgie Weaver in Dade City, Florida, in December of 1959. Virgie had children from a prior marriage as well, and although Lewis would become a stepfather to children in both marriages, he never had any children of his own. Dr. Lewis A. Ruff passed away at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Dade City, Florida, in March of 1962 at the age of 77. He'd been a patient at the hospital only a few days prior to his death. He was buried at Oakridge Cemetery alongside his first wife, Carrie. The next story I want to feature is the sad but interesting story of Frank Labradale. When I came across his headstone, I was drawn to it because of the design. Headstones with this wood-themed design typically indicates that the person was a member of the Woodsmen of America Association. It was originally a fraternity of woodsmen, and later it evolved into a larger organization, more resembling an insurance company. Frank was always thought of as a good-hearted man in his time. He passed away in December of 1887, and double parlors were required to hold the funeral service for him, as so many people attended. Floral tributes were numerous, and his funeral procession was described in the Marshall Statesman as a long line of carriages followed the remains to Oakridge Cemetery before he was laid to his final resting place. So, who was Frank Labradale? He was born in 1855 in Marshall, Michigan. He attended school in Marshall, and the first record of him shows up in 1874 at the age of 19, when he, along with a few other young men his age, formed one of the first athletic associations in the area. They even secured the services of a competent teacher, and they opened a gymnasium on the third story of E.R. Mills' store. In 1880, he was part of a newly formed club called the Oyster Club. His father had a store in downtown. It was called Laberteaux's Grocery, and Frank received some attention in the newspaper for setting up a telephone line between his father's store and their home in 1881. In the store, Frank once secured 36,000 silver eels from the state fish commissioner, which 12,000 were taken to Cedar Lake and let loose. Also, a friend in Chicago in 1883 sent him a Japanese robin, which was kept in a cage inside the store, and this also received a lot of attention within the community. In 1882, he served as a drum major in bands that played in Battle Creek, and he also founded his own band in Marshall. However, his first attempt at that did not succeed very well, and the band eventually broke up, and Frank had to sell off the instruments. He was mentioned in 1885 as playing in a band at Gogwak Lake in Battle Creek in July of that year, offering graceful jig dancing with a high intensity of pleasure. He was also an adventurous outdoorsman. He was known to be a very good shot with the rifle and also a hunter. In 1884, he embarked on a float down the river to Battle Creek with his friend Ed Webster hunting ducks. When they reached Battle Creek, they would return by railroad to Marshall. Frank also had many friends in his time over in Battle Creek, and sometimes he spoke of moving there as he regarded it as a more lively town. Somewhat funny and sad story in this story about Frank Labradale is in the Battle Creek Daily Moon concerning Frank in August of 1885. It read, "Frank Labradale of Marshall was in the city today. He came here to bury a horse, of which was killed by overdriving to Gogwak yesterday. 'Twas a sad funeral for Frank." This incident apparently happened a week or so after he played at this lively jig at Gogwak Lake that summer. In March of 1877, he was one of the crew of 10 oarsmen on a 10-oared barge called the Wah-Wah-Ta-See as part of the boat club at a picnic held at Cold Harbor Park. The boats were shown off in a regatta, making a procession down the river, so his life had many adventures, and he played an active role in the entertainment of the county. Frank, however, had trouble with alcohol. As a newspaper story that ran in the Battle Creek Daily Moon in November of 1887 said that he'd been confined to an insane asylum because of his appetite for alcoholic stimulants. That would probably be the equivalent of sending him to a drug rehab today. However, he would be home about a month later, still living with his parents, and he'd been ill for some time. And that day, on December 2nd, he was up and around the house, seemingly to feel better. But at 7 p.m., he went to retire for the evening and was in the process of changing his clothes for bed when he had a sudden heart attack and rolled off the bed, dead. In his life, he was known in the community as a lighthearted, jovial man whose spirit caused people to like him with affection. He was a true and sympathizing friend and known to be a pleasant companion. He had a wit and a genial manner which had made him a commanding presence and desirable at many pleasant gatherings of youths in his time. The newspaper describing his sudden death stated, "He will be greatly missed, and a few there are among his friends who will not pause and shed a tear of genuine regret at his sad and untimely demise. With many of us, his memory will ever be green." Dr. George Bauer Gesner was born in Duart, Ontario, Canada, in August of 1871. His grandfather was a pioneer immigrant to Canada, and his great-grandfather had served with Blucher at the Battle of Waterloo, whose sword still remained in the possession of the family at the time of his death. George was one of 11 children, and he attended Ridgetown Collegiate and Chatham Normal School, and later taking up a medical degree at the age of 19 from Trinity College, Toronto University, graduating in 1899 as a doctor. In August of that year, he moved to Eckford in Calhoun County, where he began to practice medicine. He would remain there for 3 years before he eventually moved to Marshall, Michigan, in June of 1902. On September 10th, 1902, he was united in marriage to Letty Decker, and together they would have 3 children. His medical practice connected him with his community, and he became actively involved over the years. He served as president of the Marshall Senior Chamber of Commerce, president of the Marshall Rotary, and an active member of the Marshall Country Club. As expected, he also belonged to the Calhoun County Medical Association, the State Medical Society, and the American Medical Association. He was also a member of the Knights of the Maccabees, the Modern Woodsmen, Knights of Pythias, and the Ancient Order of Gleaners. At the time of his death in October 1935, he had practiced in the city of Marshall for 33 years and was serving on the Board of Education. He was 64 years old. He was always remembered as a cheerful, kindly, and generous man to those who knew him. The final story I'm going to feature in this tour of Oakridge Cemetery is the life of Frank Alfred Stuart. His monument drew my attention when I was touring the grounds of the cemetery, as it easily is among the most impressive. The stone carvings feature birds throughout the monument with cranes, swallows, and an eagle. It also includes some very ornate carvings in the design. So who was Frank Alfred Stuart, you might ask? He founded one of Marshall's golden companies during the Gilded Age, known as the F.A. Stuart Company, which existed between 1893 to 1956. It was the largest and most successful patent medicine business in the town's history. Frank Alfred Stuart was born in Marshall, Michigan in November of 1863. He attended Marshall High School, graduating in 1882. He then got a job at the Voltiac Belt Company, working as a clerk. It was in this position that he learned the inner workings of the mail order medicine trade. He sorted, addressed, and stuffed envelopes, and answered special informational requests. He learned the importance of wordings in advertisements, a lesson that he would never forget. After several years at the Voltiac Belt Company, in partnership with his future brother-in-law, he founded a medicine company in Albion, Michigan. It had several aliases over the years: Albion Pharmacy, W.F. Church Company, and the F.A. Stuart Company. In 1899, the firm incorporated as the Pyramid Drug Company, which Frank Stuart was president and William Church was vice president. That same year, they moved the company headquarters from Albion to Marshall. Meanwhile, Frank was starting the company which he and Marshall became well known for, the F.A. Stuart Company. The firm marketed Stewart's dyspepsia tablets, Stewart's calcium wafers, and Stewart's charcoal lozenges. Though the company distributed other products, these three remedies became the staple. Stewart's dyspepsia tablets became the most popular and widely advertised remedy sold from a Marshall address. In fact, for a time before the incorporation in 1898, the business was known as the Stewart's Dyspepsia Remedy Company. Frank, having learned the value of advertising, would eventually hire an outside advertising company. His advertisements would appear in newspapers from New York to Denver to Chicago, running full-page ads that were carefully worded. He later started international campaigns in England and in Canada. Although Frank's company was a fledgling company in the 1890s, he never lacked capital for advertising. He seemed to have the golden touch in business, which made his enterprise succeed. The Pyramid Drug Company was also well established. Both enterprises provided enough income that allowed him to purchase a farm between Marshall and Albion on Brace Lake. At that site, he started a poultry business, which also yielded income. The poultry farm eventually became Stewart Acres, best known for its fruit orchards. Frank also invested in the dry cereal business. Seeing the success of W.K. Kellogg and C.W. Post over in Battle Creek in this business, he joined Colin F. Hardy in Marshall in establishing the C.F. Hardy Company, which manufactured Hardy Food. Meanwhile, his F.A. Stuart Company continued to grow, and he sold his remedies to wholesale drug suppliers, who in turn sold them to retail outlets. Possibly the greatest boon to the company came in 1926 when Sears and Roebuck and Company and the Montgomery Ward Company began to distribute the dyspepsia tablets and charcoal lozenges in the mail order catalogs. Frank possessed a sharp business sense, and he recognized the economic advantages of subcontracting the manufacturing of his products and eventually hired a pharmaceutical company to produce them. This led to corresponding reduction of staff and overhead costs, but also increased profits. After this change, his firm employed approximately 20 employees, which worked at repackaging and bulk product shipments to retailers. The company's growth during the Golden Age was not marked by its number of employees, but by rising profits. Alas, the long-term potential of the F.A. Stuart Company will never be known, as on August 2nd, 1931, at the beginning of the Great Depression, during a time when many patent medicine companies prospered, Frank Alfred Stuart died. His widow, Jessie Church Stewart, did not wish to change the business, which meant, in essence, that she did not want to continue expansion. The company gradually eliminated national advertising, and as it did so, sales declined. However, Frank had invested his money wisely, and even during its waning business years, the company was still prosperous. The company would eventually lease the manufacturing rights to its products to Allied Chemical Corporation, which paid a royalty on the sales, and the last check for that arrived in 1968. Frank is remembered as being a self-made man and also a civic-minded one who contributed greatly to his community. At the time of his death, the Marshall Evening Chronicle wrote, "Strange and incomprehensible are the ways of Providence, but humanity must submit no matter how cruel it dictates. We voice the sentiment of the community when we say that none could have been taken who will be more missed or regretted than will be Mr. Stewart." Frank Alfred Stewart was 67 years old when he died in 1931. Well, that's going to conclude this three-part series that I have done on Oakridge Cemetery. I started this project back in September, and I finally got around to finishing the last video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I've tried to select people from different times in history, as well as different levels of success and prosperity, and everything from ordinary people to amazing, successful industrialists in this series, to show you a little bit of a crosscut of everything from pioneer history to some of the early successful professionals that came out of the Marshall area. Oakridge Cemetery has a lot of stories. I hope to return there later this year and maybe do some more. It has been a fascinating journey just researching these profiles that I've presented in these first three videos. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked today's video, please take a minute to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.